want to know what it is. The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
So the secret societies are divided into two factions known as the Illuminati and the occult. The Illuminati are the false light pyramid and they run the Republican Party, while the occult are the false dark pyramid that runs the Democratic Party. These two pyramids are merged together to form a hexagram. A hexagram is two pyramids converged. You'll see that on the flag of Israel. An upside down pyramid and a right side up pyramid. Blue is used for Democrats to this is me talking. Blue is used for Democrats to represent compassion and caring for all and the luminary Venus. Red for Republican is Mars the warrior, competition, capitalism, and self-enrichment. This is why you get to choose only between your daddy the red or mommy the blue to who will be your nanny. We live in a nanny state, folks, and that's why they use blue and red. They call their artificial duality Zion. Illuminati are more connected with Lucifer, while the occult are more connected with Satan. The color white is connected with the Illuminati, and the color black is connected with the occult. Freemasons use black and white checkerboard pattern as a symbol for their belief systems. High example, generated by the potentialities of a new earth for building a new heaven. So one could even argue that their long-term plans are being implemented to create a new Jerusalem. So I'm ending here, and I'll include this wonderful website that somebody anonymous created comparing the two governments, the one that was created in 1776 and the one that was usurped that in 1871, creating the corporation in the District of Columbia. And I'm going to close with this quote here, and it goes like this. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy. We're currently $18 trillion in debt, always followed by a dictatorship. That's coming next. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history has been about 200 years. We're right about 244 years. During those 200 years, these nations always progress through the following sequence. See if you can identify where we are. From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependency, and then from dependency back again to bondage. Attributed to Scottish history professor, University of Edinburgh, Sir Alexander Fraser Tytler. So in closing, I will, the next video I'll do will be a little bit more at length to put together how our laws are still under Roman Latin law, how our monetary system was developed by the Vatican and the Caesar days, and we're still using the same monetary maritime law and debt system, why debt is being created and how we're all securitized debt from birth, and also how the laws were trusts were originally created and from the Vatican put on child's skin when they wrote the first QV trusts. It'll be a little more lengthy and a little more in depth, and a lot of it goes into the information presented right here on this wonderful site. So thank you for listening, and we'll catch you the next time, and be well. Or another time. But where did the name Columbia come from? And this site is called USA versus US, and it documents how the two, the republic and the democracy, the corporation of civil law versus the republic that we think we live under, the United States of America, small letters, versus the capital letters, United States of America, compare side by side. And when most people say, well, that's not legal under the Constitution, we don't live under that Constitution. We live on this one here on the right side. So Columbia is a name for goddess of the creation, war, and destruction, more known as the goddess of death and pain. Wonderful. She is derived from the imagery of the Semiramis, wife of Nimrod and queen of Babylon, back in the Egyptian days. The statue on the top of the Capitol building, called the Statue of Freedom, is actually Persephone, meaning she who destroys light. She is the queen of the underworld. She is crowned with pentacles and pentagrams and stars with 5 points. And let's go back quick over here, and you can see where here's Washington, D.C., laid out by Lafont, the Roman Catholic, in shape of the pentagram. So it goes on to say, when someone stands on something, it is usually an indication of ownership. This is also why when you go into court, they say, do you understand? Do you stand under your fictitious name? Therefore, she owns the facility she stands on, although the dome is on top of the Capitol building, was not finished until 1868. Columbia and Persephone are seen in other statues around the world. And also it goes on to say that the District of Columbia is run by Gnostic priesthoods of the undisclosed mystery Babylon under Masonic rule. Some of the Masonic symbolism laid out on the district streets. The obelisk, which is also in the city-state of City of London, and also an obelisk in the center of the Vatican in Rome. Again, Egyptians, they actually brought these obelisks, except for the Washington, D.C. one, over from Egypt. Now going down a little further, we see that the Gnostic priesthood includes the Illuminati, Skull and Bones Society, which John Kerry and the Bushes are members of, Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus, all the secret societies. And then the ones you've probably heard of down here, we see the Secret Society of Cecil Rhodes, that's the Rhodes Scholar, Chatham House Crowd, Commonwealth Nations, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Trilateral Commission, which is run by the Rockefellers, the Bilderberg Group, the Council of Foreign Relations that the Clintons and many, many presidents have belonged to, and the magistrates and bar attorneys. So you have to be a member of this group. The bar attorney, bar actually stands for British Accredited Registry, and is a corporation based in the city of London and chartered in Puerto Rico. And we'll get into that at another time. But I just want to keep on this District of Columbia thing. So corporate officers, by this act, we can see that it was created to make a corporation, again, United States capital letters versus small capital letters over here. We can see it started with old school, what we thought we had, the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, Constitution, which were taught in school. But that was changed in 1871 with the Treasonous Congress, creating Washington, D.C. We had the Gettysburg Act in 1864, declaring emergency war powers under the Reconstruction Act. So this put us in martial law, and some argue we've never been in martial law, out of martial law. In fact, and since 1933, we again declared bankruptcy, and martial law was declared then. So we see a corporation with the legislature was established with all apparatus of a district government created by legislative act in 1871. Corporate officers. This is what you do when you have a corporation. You form corporate officers. By the act of June 11th, 1878, it provided that the commissioners therein provided should be deemed and taken as officers of such corporation. The United States is the District of Columbia Incorporated. The United States government is a foreign corporation with respect to a state. And here in the United States Code, Title 28, Section 3200 definitions, it states the following. Small caps United States means federal corporation. So they poured over the small United States, which we all think we belong to, and made it into a federal corporation. And then just to hit home the point of the name District of Columbia, let's go over here to what the name means under entomology.
Virginia down here, this is Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. It used to be called the Territory of Columbia. You think if we were a Christian nation, we would name it after our God. Well, it is named after our God, but it's not the God of the Bible. And there is Georgetown. I was just speaking about Georgetown University, but there's Georgetown. There's the Pentagon, the pentagram, Venus, and here we have Alexandria. Now the Library of Alexandria is where Isis, in Alexandria, Egypt, is a famous library where Isis and also Serapis, who was just another form of Osiris, were worshipped. Anyway, so Virginia, between the District of Columbia, shaped like the diamond or the square, which is a Masonic symbol of the feminine, the divine feminine, the square and the diamond. Lucy in the sky with diamonds. And so between Virginia and Maryland.
So let's get into Washington, D.C. I got some questions here for you. Here's the flag, which very few people know about. Notice the 3 stars, 2 bars. Notice the red and white colors, okay? We'll get into that in a little bit. All right, let's see if you can answer any of the following basic questions about the founding of Washington, D.C. and its ownership. What date was Washington, D.C. founded? Now, we all know July 4th, 1776, the United States of America was founded. But what date was the president that holds the president, the Supreme Court, and Congress that makes the laws and runs the United States of America and all its states, and we pay our taxes to? Come on, folks, what date? Anybody? Didn't think so. Why was Washington, D.C. founded? What was the reason for forming the federal government? And you can get into the Federalist Papers and all that, but what I'm more looking for is the reason for creating the legal framework around Washington, D.C. Okay, here's an easy one. Washington, D.C. was in the state of Maryland. What city in Maryland was it before it became Washington, D.C.? And then who donated the land that became Washington, D.C.? I'll give you a hint. He was the richest man in the United States at the time. And what major university was founded 6 months before and what was to become Washington, D.C.? And who donated that land? All right, who is the White House named after? It's not named because it's colored white. That is not true. Why is the nation's capital named the District of Columbia? It's not after Christopher Columbus. That's the wrong answer. 8. What are the other districts in Columbia? If it's just a district, like an attorney, a district attorney is part of a district of a bigger area. What are the other districts in the Columbia's districts? Okay, what secret society laid the cornerstone for the nation's Capitol building? That could be easy for you guys. And then list the incredible similarities, the many similarities, the incredible similarities between the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln. So here's the Great Seal of the District of Columbia. And you can see here it's in the red, white, and blue. You have a wreath here, and you have the man squaring. His feet are squaring the circle here. There's your Freemason sign. Here's the 2-ball cane, and here's the fasces that he's holding in the other hand. Fasces, 2-ball cane, circle, squaring with his feet. All Freemasonic symbolism, as I said, the red, white, and blue. And here's Persephone, we'll get into a little bit later. Here's the shining hill that Ronald Reagan was talking about. the Golden Hills on this side. And you look at this thing right here, folks, next to the big shining. And what is this right here? I'll get into it in a minute, but look at that with little vapor trails it looks like coming off. Here's the red, white, and blue eagle holding in its mouth something. The dress, I guess, of Persephone, and she's got her tablet of codes. Imagine that's the commandments. Now look over here, folks. This looks like the state capitol, and look, it's behind an underwater, or a big tidal wave seems to be coming over here. Very strange. And look on the grass in front. Those are spiders or something creepy is crawling, it looks like, towards the Senate building, the White House, U.S. Capitol, with water rising behind it. Here's the date, 1871, I'm giving out, or when it was founded. And then it says, Justitia Omnibus. You can read it one of two ways. It means just everyone, or it means just us on the bus. All right, so what date was Washington, D.C. founded? Well, on July 9th, 1790, Congress passed the Residence Acts, which approved the creation for the foundation of Washington, D.C. But an Organic Act of 1871 on February 23rd repealed the individual charters of Washington and Georgetown and created a new territorial government for the whole District of Columbia. So the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1801, officially an act concerning the District of Columbia, it was formerly placed the District of Columbia under the control of the United States Congress. Now, isn't this interesting in that it's just Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court that are basically in the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. So they got the hens, or the foxes ruling the hen house. The Congress is overseeing themselves. Isn't that cool? All right, so there's 3 city-states. That's why they have 3 bars here on the 3 stars, excuse me. They represent the trilaterals, which we'll get into in a little bit. But the trilaterals is the City of London, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C. These are 3 separate city-states and belong to no other nation, pay no taxes. They have their own separate laws, flags, police, mayors, and post offices. The United States of America does not have control of the federal government. Congress oversees the federal government. This is where your federal taxes go, folks. It's another subject. All right, so the Constitution for the District of Columbia operates under Roman law, under Lex Fori, which bears no resemblance to the U.S. Constitution. In 1871, it created a separate corporation known as Capitalized the United States. And you need a Roman Latin dictionary to understand the words and its meanings. But I refer you to the United States Code, note the capitalization, indicating the corporation, not the republic. Title 28, 3002, Section 15, A, B, and C. It is stated unequivocally that the capital letters United States is a corporation. The Treasonous Act of the 41st Congress allowed the District of Columbia to operate as a corporation outside of the original Constitution of the United States and outside the best interest of the American citizens. The President presides over the U.S. corporation. Notice USA in capital letters. That's why they have a board of directors, a treasurer, a secretary. It's set up exactly like a corporation. If you look at the word president, it has the word resident in between. Res means to reside, a property or thing, and ident is for identification. A capital P is the principle. So it's the principle of the thing identified, and that's what they consider us, as part of their corporation. That's why we're on our citizenships. So anyway, so let's get on here. It's capitalization is significant. If you question that at all, you remember Bill Clinton in 1999 getting in front of a federal grand jury and said it depends on what the definition of is. That's what his argument was between oral and vaginal sex with Monica Lewinsky in front of a federal grand jury. This lawyer, Bill Clinton, argued it depends on what the word is, and of course they let him off, and it goes on from there. So in the 1871 was to create an entirely new document, and the kind of government they created was a corporation, folks. So what we need to understand is that the corporation is about keeping us on our fictitious characters and our straw man, which we'll get into at another time. So our currency and court systems are still based on Roman Latin law. This is why we need a Latin dictionary. Very few can even tell you what the word Latin means. We have Latin America, and very few Latinos can even tell you what the word Latin means. Our money, or one-eye system of exchange, as you see on the back of the dollar bill, was created the first SQV trust by Pope Boniface VII in 1306. He made himself the trustee of Jesus Christ holdings on earth, including the reaping of all lands and souls. These trusts, these free trusts, these SQV trusts were set up in the 1300s and early 1400s. You can look them up. The Roman Pontifex Trust, the Unum Sanctum Trust, under the SQVs, and we're still under these trusts today. A bar is a bar attorney registered to the British Accredited Registry. All United States attorneys, if they practice in U.S. courts, a corporation is a court, they must be registered under the bar. So they're registered in the City of London, practicing law in the United States. If you're a bar member, you're registered under the Crown, and also the registration papers for the corporation is in Puerto Rico. Also, the laws are under maritime law. This is why we go into court. We go under citizenship, our partnership, relationship, ownership, membership, leadership, friendship. We enter through the docket that's opened by a bailiff. Okay, it's all based on monetary. They've controlled the days of our money system since the days of Alexandria and Cleopatra. This is why we have a river bank in our current sea holding our deposit slips in liquid and frozen assets. And the name of the Vatican Church is the Holy See. Okay, and they look at us as human resources. We're just chattel or cattle in the eyes of the law. And your birth certificate was created in 1927, and it's your mother's surname that's used on the document. The hospital is paid by the government to register. Regis means crown, stir means to enroll you at birth. So you came down your water canal, and they put your foot on the landmark, so you signed the contract, and they securitized your debt against the debt that was created in bankruptcy in 1933 that we've never gotten out of. The bankers needed collateral. They created the birth certificate. All of us that get registered at the hospital are securitized collateral against the obligated debt held by the banksters of the U.S. government ever since World War I. It's never been paid off. Now, how many of you, what was the name of the city in Maryland before it came Washington, D.C.? The name of the city was Rome, Maryland, folks. And here you see on both sides of their new birthing in Rome, Maryland, is the Virgin Mary. It's Virginia and Maryland on both sides of Rome, Maryland. This was what the Vatican called the New Jerusalem they were creating. And so they put the Virgin Mary of their new birthing on each side. The land today, known as District of Columbia, bore the name Rome, Maryland in the 1663 property records. The Potomac River that bordered Rome in the south was called the Tiber River, just like in Rome, folks. They had 7 hills as well. There's 7 hills in Washington, D.C. The Capitol Hill, Meridian Hill, Floral Hill, Forest, Hillbrook, Hillcrest, and Knox Hill. Now, in biblical prophecy, at the end of which city of the 7 hills will be destroyed? Will this be Rome or Washington? Now, this is an excerpt from the Georgetown Education Library, folks, the Jesuit school. All right, so who donated the land that became Washington, D.C.? Now, these are the 3 of the most infamous unknown characters that founded Washington, D.C. that very few have ever heard of, except if you're in the Jesuit world, they're very much celebrated. And that's the Carroll family. Now, they were the Roman Catholic Carroll family. Daniel Carroll provided the land for Washington, D.C., also Georgetown University. He founded 6 months before. Charles Carroll was the war commissioner, controlling all the executive duties of the military department with its ammunition, supplies of cannonballs, shot, kettles, spikes, and nails to the army. Think that guy was pretty powerful? John Carroll, an intimate friend of Benjamin Franklin, even lived in Franklin's house. John Carroll founded Georgetown University 6 months before, not Daniel. He was also the first Catholic bishop in the United States, John Carroll. So Daniel Carroll was a member of the Continental Congress and the signer of the Articles of Confederation. He was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention and one of only 2 Catholic signers of the United States Constitution. Now remember, the Protestants came across, and they were up in north, and they desperately did not want the Jesuits to be infiltrating the Catholics. In fact, the Catholics weren't allowed to have religion. This is one of the reasons why they infiltrated and created Washington, D.C., was to separate church and religion so they could practice their Jesuit ways. Now, Daniel Carroll, he was the author of a shrine in the Constitution that powers not specifically delegated to the federal government were reserved to the states or the people. So this is how he changed it from getting the separation of church and state, so the Jesuits could infiltrate. Now, Daniel Carroll later became a member of the Congress, 1789 to 91. He was also a member of the Senate of Maryland, the first one where he served up time until his death. He was appointed by George Washington as one of the first 3 commissioners of the new federal city that is known as the District of Columbia. Those 3 stars above also represent the first 3 commissioners. They have double meanings. All right. So what major university was founded 6 months before? Jesuit Georgetown University. And you notice the emblem of Georgetown is also the emblem on the back of the dollar bill. Wow, isn't that unique? It's the Roman eagle grasping the world and the cross in a state and Roman Catholic church with a banner in its beak. So John Carroll, Daniel's younger brother, was educated on the Jesuit order in Europe and ordained a priest. He founded the private school and named it after the town where it was located in Georgetown. He went on to be elected the priest of America to become the first Catholic bishop. He was consecrated on the day of the Feast of the Assumptions. In 1781, 1 year before the founding of Washington, D.C., Carroll founded the college, Georgetown, that later became known as Georgetown University. Now, on a sidebar on this, if you go around most of cities and states, Sacramento, California, nearby where I live, the Freemasons founded the Sacramento 6 months before the state capital. And you'll find this in many, many cities and many towns. You'll find the Freemasons buildings were founded just months before the cities were founded. You can check it out where you live. All right. So John Carroll went on an expedition with 4 Catholics and bore fruit years later in Yorktown. The largely Catholic-financed French fleet cut off supplies to the British during the War for Independence to General Charles Cornwallis, and Washington was able to force Cornwallis to surrender and bring the war to the end. John Carroll was an intimate of Washington. He wrote a prayer at the time of Washington's inauguration, so they were very, very close. So here we see Washington and the Jesuits and the French collaborating together to defeat the British. But one name, surprisingly or perhaps not so, stands out. In spite of, regardless of the Pope's anathemas and fearful excommunications that sends one to hell for being a Freemason, we find Roman Catholic, Jesuit-educated Daniel Carroll's name among those who are most prominent Freemasons. How is it possible that Daniel Carroll, who represented the top echelons of the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church in America, whose cousin Charles was the most vocal political spokesman for the Church, and his brother John, a Jesuit who founded the New American Roman Catholic Church, be a Freemason? The answer lies in a deeply hidden mystery. Charles and Daniel Carroll were both members of the new Congress. Charles Carroll was elected to the Senate and Daniel Carroll to the House. They had both sides covered. And this end result gave the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no laws respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This was the day of great glory for the Carrolls in the Roman Catholic Church, as they were allowed to infiltrate with their religions. It was called their great work. It was also allowed Rome to function and flourish in America. Now, the Carrolls and Freemasons who were influencing the forming of the new American government brought into existence in year 1789, 13 years, there's that number, after independence was declared, okay? We find a very conspicuous correlation between the launch of the American government and the founding of the American Catholic Church hierarchy. George Washington was inaugurated in 1789, so was John Carroll elected the first bishop of the Catholic Church in the same exact year. Be assured it is no coincidence that the American government, the American Roman Catholic Church hierarchy, and the Jesuit Georgetown College all marked their beginnings in 1789. Okay? So George Washington became their front man, enabled Carrolls to have the American seat of government placed in their own front yard. Jesuit Charles Plowden preached on the Memorial Day when commenting on the American Revolution. This great work may appear to us to have been the work, the sport of human passion, yet the earliest and most precious fruit has been the extension of the kingdom of Christ, the propagation of the Catholic religion, which heretofore, fettered by restraining laws, is now enlarged from bondage and is left at liberty to exert the full energy of divine truth, their truth. Glorious is this day, my brethren, for the Church of God, which sees new nations crowding her bosom. And on it went. So America's national motto, seen on the back of the dollar bill, Annuit Coeptus, came to a prayer to Jupiter, appears in Book 9 of Virgil's epic Propaganda, the Aeneid, a poem commissioned just before the birth of Christ by Caius Maecenas, the multi-billionaire behind Augustus Caesar, Rome. Objective was to fashion Rome into a imperial monarchy in which its citizens would gladly sacrifice their lives. So, about Latin here, it's King Latinus comes up to form the nation of Latinium. This is where Latin comes from, folks. Fasces. Now, fasces is comes way back, and it's a term for fascism. It's back to the Roman days, and they used to call Lycor. Here's the three city-states. We have the religion run by the Vatican, the finance run by the city of London, and Washington, D.C. is the military. That's why the U.S. has 175 military occupations in countries out of 185 countries. So we dominate the world with our military. So I want to get into fasces here. Now, you notice these sticks on each side where the president is speaking in the Capitol building. These are also called lycors, and we'll get into it a little bit. But it's in the Oval Office leading to the doors and the walkways aboard the corresponding door on the opposite wall that leads to the president's private office. It's because in the Roman Republic, the blade was always removed from the bundle. These are caning rods, folks. These are sticks they used to cane them when they made new laws in Rome, and then there's an axeman's hench on the top of it. Now, the two fasces appear on either side of the flag of the United States, the House of Representatives, on the seal of the United States Senate, on the state freedom atop the United States Capitol. It's everywhere, folks. They've got this thing. See, it's on the back of the dime. These are the caning rods. The axeman hench isn't on this one, but it's all over the dimes. The National Guard uses the fasces seal. The Wisconsin State Capitol, the Lincoln Memorial. Here you see a reenactment of Roman soldiers when they make new laws. The council, general council, they go around and say, anybody object to our laws? And if you didn't like it, they would whip you and cut off your heads if it got too egregious. Here we see Colorado with the one eye and the bundling rod, the axeman's hench, all the signs of the Illuminati. Notice the date 1876. Here's George Washington with the Lycar with the fasces right there on the monument. Here it is on the Office of United States Administration and the court systems. They just flaunt it, folks. Here it is on the Military Police Brigade, 42nd. You'll also notice on Hitler's work as well. Here it is in Congress with President speaking with Nancy Pelosi and the Dick Cheney behind him. And here you see the eagles on top of the flags, the maritime law flags, folks. It's right there. All right, so the Carroll family believed that a Catholic institution could make a major contribution to the political, cultural, educated life of a fledgling nation. This proved to be a major turning point in the Catholic-Protestant relations. So I want to just bring attention to the Jesuit oath here, talking about how they will rip up the stomach and wombs of women, crush the infants. They will use if they cannot commit what the Pope or somebody's ordered them to do as far as committing murder or anything they are told to do, they will secretly use the poison cup, the strangulating cord, the steel poniard, or the leaden bullet, regardless of honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person or persons. As long as they're ordered to do it, they will follow their orders. So in 1776, as I said, everything gets established right before the country or state is being established. We see Adam Weishaupt, a Freemason, a Jesuit, came over, and May 1st, May Day, that's their day, May Day, was the year in which the Jesuit established the Illuminati 2 months before the Constitution was signed. As the Jesuit general put, we have men for martyrdom if they be required. So what they did was they contributed towards the War of Independence by putting Catholics in the war that died in the war, showing they were part of it, when in fact their end game was to get the separate church and state so they could establish their New Jerusalem in Washington, D.C. So a military alliance was formed with Catholic France against Protestant England. Why would France join a distant war? Why would France and Spain go against England unless it was part of the Catholic cause, folks? Before they came, they were having trouble penetrating. They came in through Jamestown. I'm talking about they actually had a boat called the Freemason. The Jesuits came in, and we'll see that in a little bit, into Maryland. But Maryland and Pennsylvania at the time were their only strongholds. Like I said, they only had 2 signers out of the 55 on the U.S. Constitution, but that was enough to get them in. So the church's real agenda was found in a letter from John Carroll to Cardinal Leonardo Antonelli. It's August 15th, 1790. Although this great event may appear to us to have been the work, the sport of human passion, the most precious fruit of it has been the extension of the kingdom of Christ. I already read that. The Jesuits and their French Illuminatis were the instigators of the War of Independence. This is Washington wrote back in 1790 to Bishop Carroll. Your fellow citizens will not forget the patriotic part which you took in the accomplishment of their revolution and the establishment of the government or the assistance received from a nation in the Roman Catholic faith is professed. Few Americans know the date or circumstances for the founding of the federal government. The passage of the 14th Amendment, which did not free the African Americans as advertised, but put everybody into a second-class U.S. citizens on their ships. This is what forming the corporation did. It put us on as citizen ships. So the subsequent act approved on July 11th, 1878 was enacted stating that the District of Columbia should remain and continue a municipal corporation. A permanent form of government from the district was established and provided that the commissioners therein provided for should be deemed and taken as officers of a corporation. All right, it's right here, all in the documentation, folks. All right, so who is the White House named after? This is getting into the founding of Maryland. So Catholicism came to Maryland on March 25th, 1634, on the Feast of Annunciation Day. It's the first day of the English New Year. The Protestants, as I said, had the north, and down south was the Catholics trying to make their beachhead in Pennsylvania and Maryland. All right. Then the Jesuits came in and tried to settle the Native Americans. The white man made an Indian hut of the colony's first chapel as they infiltrated into the missions, created their missions, and started spreading it across Canada and California. Yet this small group of men in Maryland they're referring to laid stronger foundations for Catholicism in America than did the Spanish in California or the French in Canada. So the White House is named after Andrew White. He's known as the Apostle of Maryland, Andrew White. He founded St. Mary's in Maryland and returned to England to die years later. Maryland, President Jefferson Davis, the only Confederate president, as the first to call the building the White House. It was General Davis who accepted financial support from Pope Pius IX that greatly assisted the Southern Confederates against Abraham Lincoln's Union soldiers in the Civil War. So here we have evidence and a letter from President Jefferson Davis received from the Pope saying they will finance the war for the South against the North. They play both sides, folks. Sidebar, the word soldier comes from sold to die, soldier. That is why they are issued dog tags. Every soldier should know this. They're just pawns in the game. All right, so the name White House was not used officially until Theodore Roosevelt had it engraved on his stationery in 1909. Previous was known as the President's Palace, President's House, and the Executive Mansion. Also note there's a White House in City of London and a White House in the Vatican. So why is the nation's capital named the District of Columbia? It's not named after Christopher Columbus. Well, Columbia is the name of the goddess of creation, of war, destruction, and the underworld. She is also known as the goddess of death and pain, Persephone. She is the statue on top of the Capitol building called the Statue of Freedom, which is crowned with pentacles or pentagrams, stars with 5 points. She's also been seen in other statues around Washington, D.C., and she's derived from the imagery of Semiramis, wife of Nimrod and queen of Babylon. It all goes back to Egypt and Babylon days, folks. All right, so what are the other districts? We already covered this, the City of London and the Vatican. They run the power. We have a one world government, folks. Your debt follows you everywhere except for 3 countries, and those 3 countries are North Korea, Syria, and Iran. It's called the Bank of International Settlements in Geneva, Switzerland. They settle all the world's trades every night. There's 5 guys in a room in the City of London that set the prices of gold. It's a one money order. It's a one world order. There's not a new world order they're creating. They already have created it. So they go and place these obelisks as their penises, phallic symbols in every town. You can see the Vesica Pisces around the Oval Office or Ovum Office. Office. So you see in the obelisk in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican, the Washington Monument, and Cleopatra's Needle, they brought all the way from Egypt and put it in the city of London. This is in reference to tribute to the Egyptian pagan god Amun-Re in the middle of Vatican City. The Egyptian-styled obelisk in Washington, D.C. is 555 feet, or 6,660 inches, surrounded by the Vesica Pisces across from the Oval or Ovum Office, representing Isis, among other things, the vagina of a female goddess. Now, here's what's really important to understand, folks. In these three trinities of the one world empire, they contain 80% of the world's wealth. 80%. And we're not talking China, we're not talking India, we're not talking Russia. We're just talking these three city-states, these small, tiny city-states. Part of this whole game they play. Now, here Lisa Giuliani gets into really excellent on the corporation. I'll put this in the show liner notes so you can see just what the corporation and the creation of the corporation was all about. But I want to get this wrapped up and get through the other questions here we have. And just also how we're put into a slave state, all of us on our citizenships, and not even able to go cross borders without our passports. And now you're going to have biometric IDs and all the rest of this Big Brother stuff clamping down. So, question 9. What secret society laid the cornerstone for the nation's Capitol building? Many of you would have said the Freemasons, and everybody's heard George Washington was a Freemason. But look at this, folks. On his tombstone, on his bust here, they've got George Washington, Freemason, and then President of the United States, and a Freemason logo. All right? Who does that unless the Freemasons are running the show? All right? So he was the Freemason that set the first cornerstone, and this is remembered from the United States. This is a quote, a letter to George Washington on the writings of George Washington, quote, "It is not my intention to doubt that the doctrine of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States yet. On the contrary, no one is more satisfied of this fact than I am." So the oath administered to George Washington on his inaugural first president, was by Robert Livingston. He was the Grand Master of the Freemason New York's Grand Lodge. The Marshal of the day was another Freemason, General Jacob Morton. Here you see Washington in his full regalia, laying the cornerstone. Here's the triangle. And then another Freemason, General Morgan Lewis, was Washington's escort. The Bible that was used for the oath was from St. John's Freemason Lodge of New York. Washington himself at the time was a Master of Alexandria Lodge, number 22 in Virginia. Of the 39, there's that number again, 39, 3, 6, and 9, that officially brought the United States government into existence, many of them were Freemasons. 13 are definitely known as Freemasons. There's that number again. There's George W. Bush with all his Freemasons, with all the regalia all around them. This is a quote from a Maryland Grand Master, Joseph Clark, September 18, 1793, on the laying of the cornerstone. "I have every hope that the grand work we have done today will be handed down to a late posterity as the like work of that ever memorable temple to our order erected by our ancient Grand Master Solomon." Look at all the Freemasons, folks. Everything from Sir Isaac Newton to George Washington. I'm not sure Hitler was. I'm not sure about Clinton. But they're all associated. Many not astronauts are Freemasons. That's how they pulled that off. FDR, definitely. All right, and number 10, the final, let's wrap this up. The incredible similarities between the assassinations of JFK and Abraham Lincoln. And the reason I put this last is to tie you in is how long the Jesuits have been running the whole show here. So the Jesuits assassinated Abraham Lincoln. I'll put this in the show notes as well from excerpts from John Smith Died out in the Adder's Den. But from 1841 to 57, the three presidents were attacked by Jesuits as outlined in the Congress of Vienna, Verona, and Chery. 2 died and 1 barely escaped. In 1855, Lincoln was a marked man. 4 years later, he was elected president. As he made his way from Illinois to D.C., he had to pass through Baltimore. He said this to Father Charles Chinquay, who he represented in court in a trial against Catholics against him. Quote, "I am so glad to meet you again. You see that my friends the Jesuits have not killed me yet, but they have surely done it when I passed through their most devoted city, Baltimore, Maryland, had I not passed by incognito a few hours before they expected me. We have proof that the company which had been selected and organized to murder me was led by a rabid Roman Catholic called Byrne. It was almost entirely composed of Roman Catholics. More than that, there were 2 disguised priests among them to lead and encourage them." Okay, so it goes on and on. And it was said an Italian barber, well known in Baltimore, a Romanist, was to have stabbed him while seated in his carriage when he started for the depot. This is from a book by Burke McCarty, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So this is an excerpt from a letter about John Wilkes Booth and the assassination. This was at the trial where 10 Roman Catholics were convicted of the assassination of Martin Luther King. John Surratt escaped to the Vatican and hid there till his death, but this is from Mary Surratt, the mother. An excerpt from her letter. "Abe must die, and now. You can choose your weapons, the cup, the knife, and the bullet. The cup failed us once and might again. You know where to find your friends. Your disguises are so perfect and complete. Now notice the cup, the knife, and the bullet. These are references to the 4th vow of the Jesuits, who I read above. Strike for your home, strike for your country, bide your time, but strike sure. This letter was used to help convict Mary E. Surratt and some other conspirators in the trial of the Lincoln assassination. They wanted to stab him. If that failed, they were to shoot him and blow him up. Those failed, so they tried to poison him. Quote, they were the emissaries of the Pope, the Jesuits. John Smith Dye, who was a witness of these events, so tells us. So this Lincoln stated, quote from him, so many plots have already been made against my life that it is a real miracle that they have all failed, when we consider that the great majority of them were in the hands of the skillful Roman Catholic murderers, evidently trained by Jesuits. But can we expect that God will make a perpetual miracle to save my life? I believe not. The Jesuits are so expert in these deeds of blood that Henry the Ninth or the Fourth said it was impossible to escape him, and he became their victim, though he did all that he could to be done to protect himself. My escape from their hands since the letter of the Pope to Jeff Davis has sharpened the million of daggers to pierce my breast would be more than a miracle. And here you see Pope Francis, when he came out a couple years ago and spoke in Philadelphia, he used Abraham Lincoln's lectern to do it. This is how they mock us, folks, and throw it all in our face. All right, so you can read about it more. I'll put all this in the show notes and what. But just to wrap it up, here's the trial of the Surratts, and this is Mary Surratt being hanged on July 7th, 1865. Roman Catholics murdered John F. Kennedy and murdered Abraham Lincoln. Here's the Confederate flag with the keys and the Vatican symbol inside of it. Here's the Pope Francis sitting in front of this hideous, whatever this is, terrible, devil, evil-looking thing that he presides over in his dragon chambers. I want to wrap it up with the incredible similarities of the assassinations of JFK and Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Oscar, stop. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so I just want to wrap it up with the incredible similarities of the assassinations of JFK and Lincoln. Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846, Kennedy Congress 1946. Lincoln was elected president 1860, Kennedy 1960. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Lincoln's secretary told him not to go to the theater. Kennedy's secretary told him not to go to the theater. Andrew Johnson succeeded Lincoln and was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. John Wilkes Booth assassinated Lincoln and was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated Kennedy in 1939. Lincoln was shot at a theater named Ford. Kennedy was shot in a car named Lincoln, made by the car company Ford. A week before Lincoln was shot, he was in Monroe, Maryland. A week before Kennedy was shot, he was with Marilyn Monroe. Lincoln was shot in a theater and the assassin ran to the warehouse. Kennedy was shot from the warehouse and the assassin ran into a theater. Both were killed and presidentially followed by Southerners. Both were shot in the head, and on a Friday, both assassins had 3 names. Both names comprised 15 letters. Booth and Oswald were assassinated before their trials.
I want to share with you today some information that I found on an old documentary about that was probably filmed over 20 years ago, and it was Britain's concern about the changeover from British law and surrendering their sovereignty to the UN or the EU, the European Union, and the United Nations, because they were concerned about going from British law, which was the Magna Carta, over into Roman, the rule of law, Roman law, which is really a Babylonian law called the Corpus Juris. Now, I've been going on about the Corpus Juris because Justinian, in between 530 and 560 roughly, was the mastermind behind bringing this Corpus Juris back, even though I think it's always been there, but he was the mastermind in the modern day Corpus Juris that we have today. Accursius, the mastermind behind the modern day Corpus Juris that controls the foreign governing corporate merchant banking system of the world today, as well as the United Nations and the European Union via the introduction of the surname in 1230 AD. The surname is the consent into modern day slavery. And around 1230 or 1215, when the Magna Carta came into being, when that was signed off, that was where the people had just had enough of this Roman draconian rule of law, which was really a military style law or a shipping law corporate law, where it was the rules or a statute law where everyone had to follow the rules, and there was no trial by jury. A lot of those sort of things didn't exist there. You were charged and then faced a magistrate, whereas with the Magna Carta you had all the rights, the common law rights of land. And I've been concerned about it, and I've been trying to warn Australia, the people of Australia, about what's happening with this corpus juris, and obviously with Whitlam signing the Unidroit Treaty of Rome in 1974, and even when President Kennedy refused to sign the Unidroit Treaty of Rome in 1963, he got his brains blown out the back of the boot of his limousine, and shortly after that Lyndon B. Johnson comes in and signs the Unidroit Treaty of Rome. What Kennedy didn't realise, I guess, that he was not the president of the United States of America. He was the president of the foreign corporate US or United States. And was that British law or was it really America? I don't think it was. I think it was a private foreign French-based and Rothschild banking system that they signed up to, and obviously the US Federal Reserve, when President Kennedy wanted to get rid of the US Federal Reserve and bring back a true American de jure bank, that was basically the end of him. Now, this documentary I found, I've taken a piece out of this documentary to share with you, because it explains, this is 20 years ago, they were onto this 20 years ago or more, and it explains some of the legal minds and their concerns about what was happening to Britain and England. And I think it's why now England is finally starting to, and a few other countries, they want to get away from this UN or European Union takeover of this one world government. It's really, I think it comes from Lenin. I think the original plans of this one world government, it's like a communist plot to take over the whole world in a one world system. And the corpus juris the EU and the United Nations operates under this corpus juris system. Now, I've always been going on about the two birthing certificates. This is the state birth certificate, and this is the original certificate of birth. This is the Christian or the creditor side of the trust, and this is the debtor side of the trust. And obviously the magistrates and the legal part, they are the administration side of this trust. And the corpus juris is the law system that governs the debtor side of it, the corporate side, and a corporation is really called a creature in the theories of corporations. And a creature is just a subservient animal, nothing more than an animal. So you really, when you come across into here, you really are just a caged animal. You have no rights. Or the Magna Carta, you've lost your Magna Carta. And because you have chosen to go from the side of common law over into the corpus juris by becoming a citizen of a governing corporation that is registered in the District of Columbia and not registered on the districts of your own country, that is the consent that they use to say to you, well, you've joined us over in the District of Columbia. So therefore, if you're an Australian or if you're in Britain, but you're a citizen of a corporation called Commonwealth of Australia or Great Britain that is registered with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission to the District of Columbia, you then become a resident or a foreigner on your own land. And once you're a foreigner, you need a license to do everything. You have no rights on that land. And the very fact, even though you say, no, I was born on this land, but it makes no difference because of your legal standing. You've gone from the Magna Carta and you've entered into the corpus juris. And all the nations, the United Nations, states, they are just simply the corporate governments of the world. and all corporate governments of the world, they're all registered with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, with the United States, which may be not the United States of America. And the minute you enter that and become a citizen of a corporation registered in the District of Columbia and not the own districts of your own land, you are considered just nothing more than a foreign animal under the laws of the corpus juris, which is the rule of law, which is the old Babylonian Roman law, whereas the common law, the Magna Carta, is the true English law. You'll notice the writing on the all uppercase text, that is the language of the corpus juris. The English language here is the language of the Magna Carta, which is proper English. And that's why they fool you, because such as the Commonwealth of Australia written in proper, as a proper capitalised text with the first letter capitalised and the rest is lowercase, that's a proper noun, a proper name. But when that name appears in all uppercase text, such as the Commonwealth of Australia, that's the one registered. As you can see here, that's the one registered with the District of Columbia in the United States, Washington DC, going from the Magna Carta into the corpus juris. So have a look at this old clip, and it's very interesting, and the concerns, this is many years ago, of what's happening in the world finally today, and maybe today some of us are starting to wake up.
Laws of the European Union are drafted not by the Euro Parliament, but by the EU Commission, one of three powerful forums in which the true might of the Union resides. Members of these forums are not elected to their positions, nor, we are told, will they ever be. When cornered, politicians and public servants routinely tell the British that the EU is just a trading partnership. Yet, underneath the surface, a different picture has emerged. In 2001, a market trader was convicted for selling a pound of bananas weighed using British imperial measures instead of grams and kilos. British District Judge Morgan, in passing judgment upon the hapless metric martyr, stated, "We are now living under a new legal order. The 1972 European Communities Act was a one-off, not an ordinary treaty, but a new way of life. These are new constitutional powers. The British Parliament surrendered its sovereignty in 1972. European laws have overriding force with priority over our British laws. The articles on the supremacy of the British Parliament are now only of historical perspective. They are non-binding." We asked constitutional expert John Bingley whether our politicians were entitled to abandon the rule of law by handing over the powers of British governments to a foreign power.
The answer is simple: no. We have much written constitution which is not really fully appreciated in this country. And these documents, the Bill of Rights and Declaration of Rights, along with Magna Carta and many other legal instruments, make it quite plain that allegiance is owed to the Queen, and that allegiance is returned by her through the contract of her coronation oath to the people. And that is not something which may be broken, and our politicians are not entitled to break their oaths of office.
It follows, therefore, that no government, with or without a popular mandate, may transfer sovereignty on a temporary or permanent basis to a foreign power that owes no allegiance to the British Crown and is unaccountable to the British people.
The new European justice system currently being introduced into the UK is known as Corpus Juris, literally body of law. Corpus Juris is designed completely and permanently to overhaul the British justice system and will include the following: the scrapping of trial by jury. Henceforth you will face a state-appointed judge who will pronounce you guilty or not guilty. The scrapping of habeas corpus. You are liable to summary arrest without charge. Under Corpus Juris, you can be detained without charge or any evidence being presented against you for up to 9 months. the scrapping of innocent until proven guilty. Henceforth, a citizen must prove his innocence against the combined machinery of the state. The scrapping of double jeopardy, or not being tried for the same offence twice. Under EU sanction, Jack Straw, while Home Secretary, gave prosecutors leave to appeal not guilty verdicts if desired. Technically, this could be done repeatedly until the required conviction is secured. The scrapping of non-disclosure. Henceforth, under corpus juris, any previous convictions you have will be made available to the court before your trial begins. There is no presumption of innocence.
The French system, or the continental system broadly, the droit administratif, places everything, the subject of the foreign or continental countries, have no rights at all. An Englishman has full liberty, except under the due restriction of law. Under the droit administratif, you have no rights except those that are allowed to you by the state. This fundamental difference is very important because it's now leading, with the takeover of the EU situation, we are now leading to a state whereby we too will come under the droit administratif. And this will stop us having a right to trial by jury. And that in itself is the back door to a dictatorial arrangement.
Well, as you can see, it's an interesting documentary for that long ago. Those people knew what was going on. There's two main dictionaries in the world, which is the law of land, the common law of land, and the corpus juris, which is the law of the sea. And there's some satanic stuff happening, because people would say, well, how did the law of the sea get up onto the land? And I think that's the Masonic system truly at work that happens there, and the reason why the goat is the symbol of Satan, and a lot of people can't make this connection. What has the goat got to do with Satan? And I've said this before. The G-O-A-T, spelt in English like a capital G-O-A-T, constitutes a goat, that thing. But when the word goat, G-O-A-T, appears in all uppercase text like this, and then you go to the Black's Law Dictionary, which is the Black Pope, the Black Nobility. The Black's Law Dictionary is the dictionary of the signs, not the words, it's of the signs. And it is not a dictionary of English. It's the concepts of the corpus juris, that's what it is. And the word G-O-A-T, written in the all uppercase text, means the sewer. And the strange part about the sewer, it is the man-made channels that channel the water from lands down into the sea. And it is through these sewers, through the goat, that the law of the sea has channeled itself through the channels of the sewer up onto the lands. And that's why the Masonic system is really called the underworld, because they're dealing with the underworld, which is the sewers, and the world of the dead. Of course, when people are buried, boxed, and put into the grave, they're boxed in under the boxing rules. So once they're in the box, they can't escape that box. Same thing happens on paper. And they enter into the underworld of the dead. And the dead text that is on tombstones is also on ledgers, your driver licenses, your bank statements, your bank cards. And what's happening is when you accept this all uppercase dead language text, which is the rules of the corpus juris, when you accept that, what you're saying to them is that that's me, I'm dead, this is my name, that's my name in the driver license, it's all uppercase language. It's debased, it doesn't work. And even proper true Latin, because it's based on a Latin text, the corpus, in this case, corpus juris, to join these two words together to string the sentence as corpus juris, which is the language, the jurisdiction of the dead, it's got to be hyphenated between the signs in order to bring the words together. And that's found in the old The Chicago Manual of Styles, that points it out, 11147 of the Chicago Manual of Styles, that points out clearly how the hyphen must be used when using the sign language. And the sign language, when it's used as Babylonian text, what they've done is they've removed the hyphens between the words. So when birth certificate or your name, John Henry Smith, is written in all uppercase text, if the hyphens are removed, it reads John and Henry and Smith. It destroys the name. It destroys your identification. It places you into Babylon, which is just a world of absolute babble. It's bullshit, total crap. But if you believe it and you accept it and you are not aware of this world over here, then you will fall into it and you will become in grave danger. What you've just seen, the documentary, kind of is a warning to the people of the world. This is a control system because it's a military style law, so that when you're in the military you don't have any rights or anything. You follow the orders of the state, and if you don't follow the orders of the state you will be punished, and even to the point of death. Whereas in the Corpus Juris, and you keep the Christian name and don't deal with the surname, because it's the surname that drags you across into the Corpus Juris. But if you go by only your Christian name and your date of birth of that Christian name, if you stick with that, then you will find yourself in the Magna Carta, which is the common law that only deals with the true Christian trust. There was no surnames in 1215. Surnames came in at 1230 when Accursius, the jurist of 1230 of the Hohenstaufen reign, he's the one that perfected the Justinian Corpus Juris to bring it back into the modern day standard today. And that is the one that's given us the ability to, or the choice, to stay with the Magna Carta as equitable title, or to go across into legal title into the Corpus Juris. Of course, we don't know this now, and that's not taught to us in schools. We're just brought up in this world, and we can never work out why we have no rights. Well, the rights are basically right here on the birthing certificates. At the age of 21, before you become an adult, which is an adulterer, you have the right to go back to your Christian name, back to Christ. And if you don't go back to Christ and you remain in this trust over here after you turn 21, after the age of majority, then you will be subject to the laws of Rome, the Roman law, the rule of law, which is the Babylonian trust. And that's where you will remain until you can work out to get back from the side of the debtors over into the side of the creditor. The patrician, the plebeian. Remember the plebiscites they have? And who votes in the plebiscite? The plebs. So if you're voting in a plebiscite, then you're a pleb. So that's a quick rundown of just sort of the dangers of the Corpus Juris and the concerns that not only just I had, but these concerns were raised 20 years ago before I even had any idea of what was going on. It's only now that I've been studying and searching, I'm starting to find this from other people. But just hope you enjoyed that, and to get your head around the parallel universe, the two parallels that we do. A lot of people say, there's another hidden account. Yes, there is. This is the account of the debtor, and over here is the account of the creditor. When you want to borrow money for your house, you will go to the administrator, which is the bank, and he will then take the money from your credit account and give it to you over into your debtor account. And if you come back to here, well then he's left paying the debt. That's why they don't want to tell you about the creditor. And that's why the Magna Carta, that is the equitable title. And that's why the governments want to hold it. That's why it's outside the Parliament House in Australia, because they want to hold the Magna Carta. And while you accept the legal titles of the state of anything, then you've surrendered your equitable title to the state. And if you come back and claim back your equitable title by surrendering all your legal titles back to the state, then you will come back to the Corpus Juris and you will have the right of trial by jury. You'll have all these rights that the Magna Carta has granted you from the beginning. But it's not the government's, it's you and I. It's our own fault that we fell over into here, and it's our own stupidity and our own ignorance and our own ability or disability to at least look and learn and to work this out. When I first was starting this, I was called crazy and all this, but it's all there. It's all actually exists in black and white. These documents are there. The standing exists. The Magna Carta is real. The Corpus Juris is real. All this is real stuff. It's satanic to the max, but the satanic side of it is what brings you from the living into the world of the dead.
Mr. Jones owned a cotton plantation and many slaves. One day he was talking to the owner of the plantation next to his, and Mr. Jones was lamenting the fact that times were tough. He was having to work his slaves harder than ever, and was having trouble with some of them being disobedient or trying to run away. The other plantation owner said he knew someone who could help.
Day 1.
One day Mr. Jones called his slaves together so a man named Mr. Smith could talk to them. Before beginning, Mr. Smith whispered to Mr. Jones, "Whatever I say, do not contradict me or interfere, and I promise you your slave troubles will end." "My name is Mr. Smith," he said to the slaves, "and this may be the happiest day of your lives. From today forward, you will no longer be slaves, but free men." Mr. Jones was so shocked he started to step forward, but Mr. Smith gestured for him to remain silent. He did, only because the other plantation owner had spoken so highly of Mr. Smith's skills. "You are no longer the property of Mr. Jones," Mr. Smith continued. "You are free. No more will you be forced to labor for the benefit of Mr. Jones. Now you can work for yourselves." Now the slaves were all murmuring and looking at each other. Many were smiling, many were looking puzzled. "In fact, you are now free to leave the plantation whenever you want," Mr. Smith said. "However, since we are surrounded by other plantations, if you leave, some other plantation owner will likely claim you as his own the moment you set foot on his property. So I urge you not to risk your newfound freedom by doing something so foolish. Instead, I suggest that you stay here, no longer as slaves, but as willing participants and part owners of this plantation. Yes, this is now your plantation." Mr. Jones bit his tongue to keep from objecting. "For now, we might as well leave Mr. Jones in charge," said Mr. Smith, "since he's the only one with any experience at running a plantation, which is quite a complicated thing to manage. But he will no longer be your master, but just another worker on the plantation. In fact, he will now be using his organizational and management skills to serve you. Whatever problems you may have had with him before, you are now all equals, and you need each other to make this work. If we all cooperate and work together, we can all reap the benefits together. In honor of this happy occasion, I present you this new symbol of togetherness and cooperation, this flag, which shall be the emblem of the new free Jones plantation." He held up the new flag, but most of those listening were still too amazed to respond. "And this shall be our motto," Mr. Smith announced. "We work together as free men for our mutual benefit, pledging our allegiance to the Jones plantation, which stands for prosperity, liberty, and justice for all. To celebrate, everyone has the rest of the day off. Enjoy your freedom, do as you please, and be back here tomorrow morning, bright and early, so that we may begin work on this great and noble new endeavor as equal free men." Finding convinced that Mr. Smith was serious, the former slaves applauded and cheered.
Day 2.
"We all want this plantation to do well," Mr. Smith said at the beginning of the next meeting, "so we can all share in the benefits. We all know that it takes a lot of effort to make a cotton plantation work. Just because you're all free doesn't mean you can stop working. In fact, since you're now working for yourselves, I expect you to work even harder than ever before, but now with pride and joy, knowing that you're working for yourselves. Of course, there still have to be rules. If everyone just does whatever he wants, the plantation won't produce anything. This experiment will fail and we'll all starve. You should be thankful that Mr. Jones has agreed to stay on to lend his knowledge and skills to this endeavor, and I trust you will all do your own part to make this work. Several of you have been chosen to act as project supervisors to manage different aspects of the operation, to make sure everyone is doing his assigned job, to make sure that the rules are followed, and so on. The rest of you may head out in the fields to start your first day of work as free men.
Day 3.
The next morning, Mr. Smith had a grim expression on his face as the daily meeting began. "I have an unpleasant duty to do today," he said. "Yesterday, Charles was caught keeping some of the cotton he picked, presumably to sell for his own personal profit. That is against the rules. That is stealing. For that, Charles must be punished." 2 men tied Charles to the whipping post. "I take no joy in this," Mr. Smith continued, "but you must understand, if we do not maintain order, if we do not have rules that we all abide by, then the plantation will fail, and we will all suffer." The whip cracked against Charles' back. "But if we all pitch in for the common good, then we can all prosper. Being free doesn't mean you should be selfish and greedy. We must each do our assigned duties and obey the rules, and then we can all benefit, and each of you will receive your appropriate share of the profits." A young man named Samuel stepped forward. "But if you and Mr. Jones decide the rules and whip us if we disobey, how is that any different from what we had before?" "How can you say that?" Mr. Smith asked. "I'm shocked. You were a slave before, and now you're free. Things still need to be managed and organized by those best qualified to do so. Do you know how to run a plantation, Samuel?" "Well, no," he answered. "But if we're free, why do we get no say in what the rules are and how things work?" "I'm surprised at your ingratitude," Mr. Smith answered. "None of you know how a plantation is run, so you're in no position to be making decisions about how things are done here. You don't seem to appreciate all the things that Mr. Jones provides for you, from protecting you from all the outside threats you know nothing about, those who would come here, capture and enslave you, if not for Mr. Jones' protection, to making sure that you all have food and housing, tools to work with, you're cared for when sick and injured, and so on. There wouldn't be a plantation at all, no cotton to pick, no land to plant and harvest, if not for him. You should be grateful that he's made possible the level of comfort you now have. Your lives would be far worse if not for him. Nevertheless, as free and equal participants in this endeavor, from now on at each meeting, any worker may have 2 minutes to ask questions or voice suggestions or complaints." With that, the workers all seemed satisfied and headed out again to the fields to pick the cotton.
Day 4.
"I have a big announcement," Mr. Smith said as the daily meeting began. "Mr. Jones' cousin is here, and not just to visit and see how our project is coming along. It has been decided that from now on, you will be deciding who will manage the plantation. Of course, this job can't be done by just anyone, but every 3 months we will have a special meeting at which all the workers will vote on whether we think Mr. Jones should run the plantation or whether we think his cousin, Mr. Johnson, should run the plantation. That means that ultimately you are in charge because you will be deciding which man you want running things on your behalf. If you don't like the way things are being managed, you now have the power to change it." Amazed and pleased, the workers headed out again to the fields to pick the cotton. Days passed, months passed, a year passed, and the plantation continued to operate as before. Sometimes Mr. Jones was in charge, sometimes Mr. Johnson was in charge, but the day-to-day routine stayed exactly the same. The workers worked hard, long hours every day, and still had little to show for it. Every day the meeting would begin with them all reciting the Jones Plantation motto, "We work together as free men for our mutual benefit, pledging our allegiance to the Jones Plantation, which stands for prosperity, liberty, and justice for all." One day Mr. Smith announced, "Samuel is asked to say a few words this morning, and whatever the rest of us may think of his ideas and opinions, we are all free here, and that means we are all allowed to speak our minds. So, Samuel, you have 2 minutes. Begin." Samuel stepped forward, looking scared. "I was excited when all this started," he began, glancing nervously at Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones. "But don't you all see what's happened here? Nothing's changed. We're all still slaves." There were grumbles of disagreement from the crowd. "They tell us what to do and whip us if we don't. They still make all the rules and punish us if we disobey. They let us make suggestions and complain about things, but they never really change anything. They let us choose between Mr. Jones and Mr. Johnson, but what's the difference? The situation stays the same. We do all of the work and they take as much as they want and decide how much they'll let us keep. They live in luxury, made rich by the cotton we pick. We do all the work and have to build our own huts, grow our own food, and take care of ourselves. They leave us just enough that we don't revolt or run away. This is not freedom. We're all still slaves. They've only changed the words they use, but nothing else has changed. They say we're all free and equal, but we're not. They command and we obey. That's not freedom. That's not equality. They say we're free to leave, but all that means is that we're free to be someone else's slave. Why should we work or obey the rules? We didn't agree to this. They made the system. They forced it on us. They control and rob us and call it freedom. They've deceived you into thinking that being able to choose which slave master you'll work for is the same as being free. It's not. Open your eyes. If you keep what you produce, they call it stealing. When they take what you produce, they call it sharing and fair distribution. Can't you see that this is all your time? Ease up, Samuel, Mr. Smith announced calmly. At his gesture, two supervisors grabbed Samuel by the arms and led him to the whipping post. I'm sorry, Samuel, but you've broken the rules. There are rules against encouraging others not to work and encouraging others to break the rules. You're only hurting all of us with your discontentment and your complaining and your disobedience. The whip fell and Samuel let out a grunt. Without rules, without order, all would be lost. Without law, there would be chaos. We can't just behave as wild animals, each doing whatever he pleases. We must all follow the plan and all do our duty for the betterment of everyone. And those who do not must be punished. The whip fell again and blood flowed freely from Samuel's back. Samuel, it is you who are stealing from the others. When you don't do your assigned work, you are making more work for others. When you disobey the rules, it is you who are endangering the future of everyone else here. You are the thief. You are the criminal. You are the one trying to destroy the arrangement that keeps us all safe and prosperous. At every lash of the whip, the other workers cheered louder and louder, some yelling curses at Samuel. Being spoiled and selfish, you complain about everything, talking as if you're oppressed. But you are the one ruining things. You are the one keeping us from being all we could be. It is your greed and your rebelliousness that is hurting all of us. They all play by the rules, Mr. Smith said, gesturing at the others. What makes you think that you don't have to? You think you're above the law? There were loud yells of agreement as the whip fell again. We must maintain order, Mr. Smith proclaimed, to make this plantation great, to make it so that we can all be happy and prosperous. To have the society we want, there have to be rules. We all have to contribute our fair share to this great endeavor, and we cannot tolerate actions and attitudes that seek to undermine the amazing things that together as free men we have achieved and will continue to achieve. Mr. Jones was smiling as he gave Mr. Smith a pat on the back. The crowd was cheering so loudly that none of them had noticed that Samuel had died.